Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well. This is the second week of class for Fall 20. And in this podcast, I want to give you the big picture of what I'm looking for over the next couple of weeks. I already talked about this, but what students and hate about history is this, names, dates, just the super detailed part of it. And it is true that can really squeeze the life out of what is an incredible story, the story of the past. And so, my theory of teaching is to give you the big picture, or to put it another way, to tell a story about what I'm studying or talking about. And in this case, it's Texas history. And then when it comes to the specifics, to signal you what I'm looking for. So in this podcast, I want to talk about the big picture, what I'm talking about, what I want to stress, what I want you to take from the course, because it's often the big picture that students take from a course rather than the details, which are hard to remember and you can always look it up anyway. So big picture number one, or big picture point number one. The Spanish never really populated Texas. There were never a lot of Spanish in Texas during the period in which Spain owned Texas. And Texas was a colony of Spain, which lasts from, the early 1500s, or let's say 1492 with Columbus, to 1821. Now, there were Spanish up here, and they had an influence on Texas that lasts till this day. The Spanish language, the Catholic Church, Texas City, San Antonio. That's a legacy of the Spanish period, and a significant legacy of the Spanish period. So Spain did leave a profound footprint on Texas, but at the same time, there were never that many Spanish up here. As late as the 1820s, just 15 years before the Alamo, there were only about 5,000 people of Spanish descent in all of Texas. 5,000. Think about it. UTSA is, when it's going strong, is almost 30,000. So there were never that many Spaniards in Texas. Okay, so there's this saying which I really love. It's to populate is to govern. And one of the points that I want to make, another point that's related to that, is the Spanish rule over Texas was always pretty shaky, in the sense that the Spanish had competitors. And that's what I'm going to talk about next, the Spanish competition. Number one, and most importantly, were the Comanche, who come into Texas at about the same time that the Spanish begin settling Texas. The Comanche come in from the Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico area into north and west Texas, and they dominate about half of the state until really the 1880s, for almost a century and a half. The Comanches basically have their own nation that includes Northwest Texas, Eastern New Mexico, Southwest Colorado, Oklahoma, and Kansas. It's pretty incredible if you think about it. And that's what the Gwynn book is about. So the Spanish don't defeat the Comanche. The Comanche actually stopped the Spanish from moving further north. We're used to, when we think about the New World, we're used to Europeans coming in and subjugating native tribes. That seems to be the normal story. This is not the story in Texas. The Comanche were far stronger in Texas, and in New Mexico for that matter, but let's focus on Texas. The Comanche were far stronger in Texas than the Spanish were. And ultimately, the Spanish had to make peace with the Comanche, and I'll talk about that in a podcast. So think about that. It's a reverse of the normal story. Sorry, I just knocked my computer. It's a reverse of the normal story of Europeans coming in and dominating Indian groups. That doesn't happen in Spanish Texas. The Comanches are stronger. The Comanche are stronger in Texas than the Spanish. Number two is the Spanish, and I'm going to talk about this in podcast today. The Spanish were, from their point of view, Texas was a buffer state. And Texas was a borderland state. And after the 1680s, what Texas bordered on, and again, I'll talk about this in the podcast that you're going to be listening to, is French Louisiana. And the Spanish were extremely concerned that the French wanted to grab Texas for reasons that I'll talk about in a podcast. So Texas was important for the Spanish, not because there was much money here uh, or anything of the sort. Texas was important to the Spanish because it provided a buffer zone between French Louisiana and the very wealthy mining region of what today is central Mexico. So the Spanish are very, very sensitive about their border with the French, which is established in the 1680s. And again, this is a date you need to know, and I'll talk about it. It's when LaSalle comes in. The French come into Louisiana in the 1680s, 1690s. And here's the story in a nutshell. When the Spanish feel their border is being threatened, they pay attention to Texas and they devote resources to Texas. When the Spanish feel comfortable about Texas, when they don't feel Texas is being threatened, then they retrench because it's very expensive what they're doing in Texas. So that's one of the other points that I want to make, that in what's now East Texas was a border region that beginning in the 1680s, 1690s bordered Spain's great rival, the French. And it becomes a hot contact zone. So I want you to be aware of that. I think that I think those are the big points that I want to make. Uh, so just kind of keep those bigger points in mind as you approach the material today, and try to fit the details that you're going to encounter this week into those big picture items.